Hi friends, my name is Elisa Martin, and much like Angelique's story, my story is layered and messy with many more details than I can unpack here today. But what matters most is that it's a story about how God is always speaking, how He kept showing up, and even in the struggle, He was using every moment to grow me and lead me back home. So I was married from 2015 to 2020, and 5 years ago, I faced the hardest decision of my life. Do I stay in a marriage with a man whose choices were slowly breaking my spirit, or do I leave, breaking my commitment to save myself? For the 8 months leading up to that decision, I was going to Al-Anon. And if you're not familiar with it, AA is for the person struggling with alcohol, and then there's Al-Anon for the people around them, the ones whose lives are being affected in silence. Every week you have a chance to speak, but for months, every time it was my turn, all I could say was, I pass. My emotions were just way too high. It was kind of like I was holding back this floodgate. At the time, I was married to a high-functioning alcoholic and an emotionally unhealthy man. But the reality is, I too had to face the truth that clearly I had my own emotional health to tend to, because in retrospect, there were warning signs that I let slide. And because, some part of me probably believed that I could love him enough to heal what was broken inside of him. But here's the thing, you can't ever do the work for another person, and you need to be healthy enough not to want to. But one of the really amazing things about God is that He's kind, even in His correction. Not necessarily easy, but He's kind. So one day in that support group, I finally had the courage to speak up. And there was no advanced preparation, no real understanding of the words that would just suddenly start flowing out of my mouth. I just started speaking, and I'll never forget what I said. I said, it feels like my husband and I are in the middle of the ocean just struggling to tread water during a terrible storm. With swells so high, it's hard for us to stay afloat. And there was me and him and a life preserver. I swim and I grab it and I push it to him, only to have him push it away. I swim and I get it again, and he just pushes it farther away. And over again, I'm growing weaker and weaker, thinking this time he's surely gonna reach it and save us both from drowning. And I'll tell you what, it was in that moment that everything that God was already trying to get me to see came full circle for me. And that was, it was time for me to get out of the water and to save myself. Now that moment of clarity came shortly before I finally had the courage to move out. But the truth is, God had already been speaking to me, trying to get my attention in many different ways long before that moment. Sometimes we confuse love and loyalty. It's true that God hates divorce and He honors commitment, but He will never ask us to stay in a situation that pulls us away from Him or from who He made us to be. Over the years in my marriage, sometimes God whispered and sometimes He yelled. Other times He used ordinary people to try to get through to me when I didn't want to see. Like my life coach who told me I was the boiling frog. I hated that metaphor, but my understanding is it's also science. So if a frog is put into boiling water, it jumps out immediately because it perceives that it's in danger. But if that same frog is put into lukewarm water and brought to a boil slowly, the frog doesn't even realize it's in danger and it's literally cooked to death. I would say that was definitely an early God whisper. But then came the moment that I will never forget, when God made sure that I knew that the message was straight from Him. So I was home alone and feeling completely lost in terms of what to do. And I happened to see a show that day, and I say happened because I don't believe that it was coincidence at all. And that show said that when you're feeling lost, ask God a simple prayer. And that prayer is, God, show me whatever you need me to see. So I laid my head on the pillow that night and I asked that very prayer with an open heart. And the very next morning, God answered that prayer, and he answered it loud. Now, I'm not going to share exactly what he showed me, but let's just say that he revealed truths that dishonored our marriage and shattered any remaining trust between us. But I still didn't leave immediately. And from there, God, he kept revealing many more things that I didn't want to see. Like my dad with tears in his eyes who said, "You're losing your spirit," to a psychologist who had only met my husband and I like 3 times. And when I asked him a direct question I thought he'd never answer, because they never do, I said, "If I were your daughter, what would you tell her?" And he looked me right in the eyes and he said, "I'd tell her to run for her life." And then even back to that life coach, the boiling frog, he hit me with another hard truth, another warning really wrapped in truth. And that was the parable of the flood. And if you don't know this story, this is how it goes. There's a man who's trapped in his house during a flood, and he prays to God to save him. And so a neighbor offers him a ride to safety in his truck, and the man says, "That's okay, God's gonna save me." And so the waters rise so high, they force the man onto the 2nd floor, and now a boat comes by, and he still passes saying, "God will save me." Then the waters rise so high, they force the man all the way onto the roof of the house, and now a helicopter comes by, and the man says no, stating, "God will save me." Well, if you know this parable, then you know what happens next, and that is the man drowns. And when he gets to heaven, he says, "God, why didn't you save me?" And God's like, "Dude, I sent you a truck, a boat, and a helicopter. What more could I do?" You see, God he's always speaking. But the question is, are we really tuned in and listening? It's funny, when I share my story, I often say that you could say that I too passed on my truck and my boat, and I made my way all the way onto that metaphorical roof. But when God's helicopter came, I took his hand. And for that amazing grace, I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't even trade the pain. And there were unspeakably dark days. Days I wish that a fatal car crash would take me out, or a terminal diagnosis, just to stop the pain in my heart. But even on those days, in those moments, God was with me. And today I can say with complete and total certainty that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I'm becoming more and more the woman he intended for me to be. And through all of it, wow, I have grown in ways that I never imagined. And there is this peace and this joy in my heart like I've never known before. And now God's using me in many ways. And sharing these stories is so important because he uses them to help other people, to remind you that when the rug gets pulled out from under you, when what you thought that your life would look like becomes like this blank sheet of uncertainty, even that can be a love story. In fact, it could be the love story. So if you're in the middle of your own storm right now, let me say this. Don't just ask God to take away the storm. Ask him for the strength to walk you through it. Ask him to show you what the storm is here to teach you. Because I had a lot to learn through mine. There were red flags that I ignored, choices that I made that I had to own, and growth that I needed to lean into that had me in that kind of relationship in the first place. So maybe, just maybe, the storm you thought came to break you is actually the very thing that God wants to use to transform you. And if you let him, he will take every tear, every broken piece, and he will build something stronger, something more beautiful, and something more full of purpose than you ever imagined. I promise you.